Thanks for your watching TV spoilers. Young and the Restless reveal that the war between Nick and Matt right now isn't just another confrontation, it's a storm built from old hatred, the fear of losing control, and a protective instinct so intense it turns into something reckless. The moment Matt resurfaces, everything in Genoa City shifts. The air thickens with the sense that a man who feeds on chaos has returned to drag everyone back into the same familiar trap. Nick understands Matt's kind of enemy all too well. This isn't someone who wants to win a fight and move on. Matt wants victory to become a permanent scar and Nick's reputation on his mind, on the life he's tried to build. The harder Nick pushes to end this nightmare quickly, the more Matt enjoys stretching it out. Because Matt doesn't hunt out Cumish hunts the moment he can watch Nick fracture from the inside. Nick steps into the plan to rescue Sienna wound tight, not because he lacks courage, but because he knows every move carries the potential price of blood. Deep down, he's torn between two forces that should contradict each other, yet somehow coexist in him. On one side, the need to do what's right and pull someone back from the edge; on the other, the need to prove to himself that Matt cannot turn him into a pawn again. That urgency is what makes Nick accept more risk than he normally would. He refuses to hesitate, because hesitation would give Matt time to construct a new narrative, another version of truth, where Nick is once again the man forced to explain himself, to defend himself, to endure doubt in the eyes of the people he loves. Matt's ambush lands like a slap across Nick's belief that he still has control over the situation. It isn't loud in the sense of spectacle, it's violent in a colder way, sharp and deliberate. As if Matt has measured Nick's breathing and chosen the exact second to strike. Nick is only just moving deeper into the rescue plan when everything rips apart. The brawl explodes as more than physical impact, it's two histories colliding. One side is fueled by protection and an almost desperate need to make things right. The other side is powered by destruction for its own sake, by the pleasure of watching someone panic. Nick fights on survival instinct, but Matt fights for the thrill of breaking people. And the result is Nick being badly injured in a way that makes his body betray his will. Whether it's a fall from height or a blow from something hard, the point isn't the exact wound, it's the moment. Nick is knocked out of the driver's seat of his own life. In that instant, Nick isn't the one deciding the game anymore. He's the target, dropped to the ground like a warning. Like a message that Matt is back and the old rules don't apply. When Nick is found unconscious, the silence around him becomes the most terrifying thing. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of danger, of a life suspended by a thread. That image hits the Newman family like a fist to the chest. All the pride, strength, and confidence they normally wear like armor suddenly feels useless in the face of Nick lying still, needing emergency help. From that moment on, the tension isn't only about who wins and who loses, it's about the most primal fear of all. Whether Nick will survive, and if he does, whether he'll come back whole. Sharon is swallowed deepest by that terror because she isn't only looking at an injury. She's looking at a cycle repeating itself. She sees the ghost of the past returning in the same cruel pattern, dragging Nick into danger, and forcing her to watch the man she cares about pulled toward the edge. Sharon's panic isn't merely a reaction to Nick's condition, it's a reaction to helplessness. To the nightmare truth that Matt can still reach them, can still tear apart everything they've tried to rebuild. She panics because she understands this: if Matt is ruthless enough to ambush Nick once, he's ruthless enough to do it again, and next time there may be no rescue, no second chance, no room for hope. And while everyone is still reeling between fear and fury, another development arrives like a crack, splitting the story wider. Nick gets behind the wheel. It sounds like a small detail, but it opens an entire new kind of dread. Nick being able to drive means he's trying to pull himself out of the situation, or trying to force the chase toward an ending he believes is necessary. But being able to drive doesn't mean being stable. Nick's body has just taken severe trauma, his mind has just absorbed a direct shock. And the most dangerous thing is that he still tries to push through, as if sheer will can override reality. In this moment, Nick's toughness becomes a blade that cuts both ways. The harder he fights to stay in control, the more he proves he isn't beaten, but the more he reveals how close he is to the cliff. Because he refuses to accept weakness, Matt understands exactly how to exploit that, and he waits. He doesn't rush. He doesn't operate on random impulse. Matt loves symbolic strikes, the kind that make the victim feel their entire life can flip in the space of 1 second. And that second arrives. Nick takes his eyes off the rearview mirror for the briefest moment. Just a moment, but enough for Matt to turn it into a nightmare. Matt lunges and begins choking Nick while Nick is driving. No warning, no time to brazenly the sudden, violent panic of not being able to breathe. And the terror of trying to keep a moving vehicle under control at the same time. That image exposes Matt's cruelty and also lays bare Nick's condition. Nick clamps down on the steering wheel like he wants to crush it. His body bends at a painful angle, muscles tightening as he fights for air. And in that moment, the most horrifying question rises not in Matt's mind, but in Nick's. Is he about to cause a crash on purpose? Not because he wants to die, but because some desperate part of him may believe a violent impact is the only way to make Matt let go, the only way to end the hunt for good. Nick is trapped in a choice without words. If he stays calm, Matt may squeeze harder and Nick could black out with his hands still on the wheel. If he loses control, the car becomes a weapon, and the price could be both their lives. The tension here isn't simply will there be an accident, but how many seconds does Nick have left before his body decides for him? Elsewhere, Sharon's fear turns into action. There's no time to panic in place. Panic becomes urgency. Find Nick, stop an ending that cannot be undone. Sharon calls the police, not because she sees Nick as a criminal, but because she knows only an emergency response can possibly intercept the car before it becomes tragedy. For Sharon, it's a race against time and also a race against her own worst memories. She fears that if she's even 1 minute too late, she'll get a cold notification and spend the rest of her life living inside questions that never get answered. Nick's life is threatened in two ways at once, by Matt's hand tightening around his throat, and by Nick's own collapsing margin for decision. Matt wants to watch Nick panic and make the fatal mistake. He wants to turn Nick into the man who caused the disaster, or at least the man who ends up unable to explain what really happened. Nick, meanwhile, is caught between the instinct to protect and the rage that demands an immediate ending. Like only a clean, brutal finish can guarantee Matt will never come back again. But that very desire for a decisive ending is exactly what Matt craves. Because Matt survives on the moment other people lose themselves. As the story surges toward its breaking point, the atmosphere in Genoa City stops being ordinary suspense. It becomes sustained suffocation. As if the whole city is holding its breath with Nick inside that car. Sharon is on the line, the police are mobilizing. The Newman family is trapped between fury and helplessness. And Nick is fighting inside a cramped space between the steering wheel and the arm crushing his airway. Everything narrows to seconds, to meters of road, to heartbeats. And the most terrifying truth is that no one knows what Nick will choose to do to escape a cause. Nick himself may not have enough air left to choose. The car keeps moving. Nick's hands locked on the wheel as if it's the last thread connecting him to life. While Matt's grip tightens with the sick calm of a man who believes he always wins at the final second. Somewhere ahead, sirens begin to rise. But no one can be sure they'll arrive before Nick loses consciousness, or before the car suddenly veers according to a decision. Only one person inside it truly understands a decision that could leave Genoa City waking up to a headline no one ever wanted to read. The news that Nick had been rushed to the hospital hit the Newman household like a lightning strike. Through whatever fragile calm they had managed to hold onto, no one was prepared for the sensation of their hearts dropping at a single urgent call. For the cold precision of the words emergency admission. For the terrifying pause before anyone could confirm whether Nick was breathing on his own. This family has survived crises, enemies, and the constant whiplash of Genoa City. But they never truly become immune to the moment a familiar name turns into collective panic. The fear didn't erupt in loud theatrics. It rose like ice water flooding the lungs, compressing every thought into one relentless question. Was this the time they lost Nick for real? Before that call, Nick had already made a choice that placed him on the edge of disaster. He had been secretly tracking Matt, determined to get Sienna out from under the shadow of Matt's dangerous scheme. He wasn't doing it to play the hero or to indulge some inherited Newman appetite for winning. Nick's motive was heavier, more complicated. Matt wasn't only a present threat, was a scar from the past. A reminder that what you think you buried can still crawl out and bite you when you least expect it. Nick understood that if Matt was allowed to keep pulling strings in the dark, Sienna would only be the first link. The next target could be anyone. And the worst part was that Nick himself could be shoved into yet another situation, where he'd have to prove he wasn't guilty, like his life was destined to be a loop of traps. And aftermaths. Nick followed Matt with a mind that tried to stay sharp while his body carried tension. Like a loaded spring. He kept telling himself to stay cold, to stay calculated, to keep emotion from ruining everything. But the closer he got, the stronger his protective instinct burned. The thought of Sienna being swallowed by something dangerous made it impossible for Nick to simply watch or wait for someone else to intervene. He chose action. He chose risk. He chose placing himself on the front line to cut off the hand that was closing around another person's throat. Deep down, he also knew the darker truth. By doing this, he was walking straight back onto the terrain Matt controlled best, where fear and instability and a single second of distraction could be turned into a weapon. But Nick kept going because stepping back would mean living with helplessness. And helplessness was the one thing he hated more than pain. The plan to rescue Sienna existed like a thin wire stretched between hope and catastrophe. Nick believed secrecy and determination would be enough to slip past Matt's defenses, enough to get ahead of him. But Matt wasn't the kind of enemy you circled without paying for it. As Nick moved closer to acting, the danger signs thickened, as if the air itself was warning him that a counterstrike was coming. And then the worst happened. Matt discovered what Nick was doing. No dramatic warning, no negotiation, just the sudden realization that Nick was no longer the watcher. He had become the hunted. The ambush came with calculated brutality. Matt didn't attack merely to stop Nick. He attacked to teach him something, to shatter Nick's belief that he could control the tempo of this war. The confrontation turned vicious fast, a storm ripping through every plan Nick had built in his head. Nick fought back with everything he had: instinct, experience, sheer will. But Matt overwhelmed him in the cold, methodical way of a man who had prepared, who had studied how to strike where it would hurt most. Matt exploited Nick's urgency to save someone, his visible rage, his refusal to hesitate. The more fiercely Nick pushed forward, the easier it became for Matt to twist the moment. The more Nick tried to hold on to calm, the harder Matt shoved him toward the edge, where survival instincts turn into dangerous reflex. And then came the break, the instant where Nick lost balance. Whether from a brutal blow or a fall from height, and everything seemed to snap in half. His body stopped obeying his will. Weight, impact, and then darkness. Nick went down hard, unconscious and severely injured at the scene. Like Matt had slammed a brutal period into Nick's attempt to rescue Sienna. The violence wasn't only in Nick collapsing. It was in how quickly it happened, how final it felt. As if Nick's entire effort had been nothing more than entertainment to the man who had been waiting to destroy it. Sienna witnessed it in a panic she couldn't contain. Her fear wasn't only for Nick, it was for herself. For the sickening truth that she was trapped in a story she didn't control, where the one person who tried to pull her out was beaten down right in front of her. She was frantic, desperate for help. And her desperation carried something sharper beneath it: guilt. If Nick hadn't come for her, he wouldn't be lying there broken. Even if she knew Matt was responsible, the crushing thought that she was the reason Nick paid in blood still pressed against her ribs, until breathing felt uneven. Matt, in that moment, didn't need words. He was a shadow over everything, a presence that made it unmistakable who held power and who didn't. Across town, the Newman family received the news like a sentence. The terror wasn't only that Nick might die, it was the sick realization that they were being dragged into another war in the most helpless way possible. Sharon felt it like a direct strike at her weakest place, because she wasn't just seeing an injury. She was seeing the past repeat itself. She had lived through enough devastation to know how quickly one mistake becomes irreversible consequences in Genoa City. And this time the price could be Nick's life. Sharon's panic wasn't naive. It was the panic of someone who understands how fast tragedy arrives and how cruel it can be. Victor, behind his usual steel, was shaken in a way few would ever witness. He could command, control, and destroy enemies when the battlefield was business or strategy. But he couldn't command the outcome when his son's life was on the line. He wouldn't admit weakness, but it showed in every urgent decision, every attempt to impose order on a family that was trembling. Victoria was hit just as hard. For her, Nick wasn't only family. He was a pillar. If he fell, it wouldn't just be personal loss. It would be a crack running through the foundation of everything the Newmans were trying to hold together. Nick was rushed into emergency care, and from that moment time itself became the enemy. Every minute that passed tightened the grip on Sharon's chest. Every sound in the corridor, every movement from medical staff, every fragmented update about Nick's condition cut into the family's endurance. The doctors fought for Nick's life, and their urgency created a strange, suspended atmosphere of hope and despair existing in the same breath. Sharon prayed in silence. Victor clung to control like a lifeline. Victoria tried to stay steady so Sharon wouldn't collapse, even as her own fear burned cold beneath her composure. They all understood the same brutal truth: Nick's body would decide for them. But the most terrifying part wasn't only Nick's injuries. It was the question of what truly happened out there and how far Matt had already pushed this. The police began investigating, and Matt became the primary suspect. Yet in Matt's world, being the prime suspect didn't automatically mean being caught. Matt had always known how to slip past the law with cunning and timing, with the ability to turn chaos into cover. The investigation made Genoa City hold its breath because the fear wasn't only for Nick. It was for Sienna. If Nick a Newman could be dropped and left unconscious. Then what did that mean for Sienna if Matt decided to escalate? The safety of Sienna became inseparable from the question of whether Nick would survive. Because Nick had put himself in front of the danger for Heron, now that danger had proven it could crush him. And that is where what's unfolding now becomes even more horrifying. Because the story does not stop at an ambush and an injury. In the chaos, another development emerges like a nightmare detail: the car. And the moment Nick ends up in the driver's seat, it feels fateful because the driver's seat is control, and Nick, even injured, still tries to cling to control as if it's the last thing keeping him alive. He can drive, but something is wrong. Trauma slows his body. Shock weighs down his mind. And the most dangerous thing is that he keeps pushing himself through, as if willpower can outrun reality. Nick's toughness becomes a double-edged blade. It proves he refuses to be beaten, but it also reveals how close he is to the edge. Because he will not allow himself to admit weakness. Matt understands that, and he waits. He doesn't rush. He never has. He lives for symbolic moments. The kind that make you feel your entire life can flip because you looked away for 1 second. And that second arrives. Nick glances away from the rearview mirror for the briefest moment, and Matt uses it like a trigger. Matt's hand clamps around Nick's throat while the car is still moving, turning the interior into a sealed trap with no room for help. Nick grips the wheel, his body bending with the shock of losing air, forced to fight for breath and control at the same time. This isn't just violence, it's domination. Because Matt wants Nick to understand that even when Nick believes he is driving, he is still being controlled. In that moment, Nick's inner world splits. One half screams to survive, to keep the car steady, to wait for the one chance to escape. The other half surges with rage and a terrifying, desperate idea that maybe only a crash would make Matt let go. Only impact would end the choking grip and end this hunt for good. Nick doesn't want to die, but he also doesn't want to live as prey forever. Even a flicker of that thought is enough to put both their fates on a razor's edge. And Sienna, somewhere in the chain of events, remains the reason Nick chose risk in the first place. And the weight that makes him refuse to collapse. Sharon, sensing that the situation has moved beyond anything she can fix with hope alone, cannot stand still and pray for a miracle. Her panic becomes action. She reaches for the police, for emergency intervention, for any system that can intercept Nick before the story crosses a point of no return. In Sharon's mind, the horror sharpens into one clear fear: if Nick loses consciousness while driving, if the car veers on reflex or desperation, the outcome won't just be an assault, it will be catastrophe. And what tears at her most is the helplessness of it. She cannot be beside him, cannot touch him, cannot breathe for him. All she can do is race against time and pray help arrives fast enough. Back at the hospital, all those threads: the ambush, the fall, the unconscious body, the moving car, the choking hand tighten into one suspended question over the Newman family. What does Matt actually want? Matt didn't simply injure Nick and walk away. He pushed further, as if he wanted to craft an ending that Genoa City would never forget. That realization fuels Victor's fury. Because Victor sees this for what it is: not only a personal attack, but a direct challenge to the Newman name. And for Victor, nothing is more dangerous than an enemy bold enough to touch his son. As the police investigate, the atmosphere across Genoa City becomes heavier. Like everyone is waiting for the next explosion. No one says it aloud, but everyone feels it. If Matt is still free, Sienna is not safe. If Sienna is not safe, then Nick's sacrifice becomes unfinished, even if he wakes up. And if Nick wakes up carrying the weight of failure, the wound won't only be physical. It will be psychological, the kind that can drive him into even riskier decisions. Because he cannot tolerate the thought that he tried to save someone and lost. The future of Nick and the safety of Sienna become the city's biggest fear. Not because people suddenly care about morality, but because they can sense the scale of danger when someone like Matt is willing to go this far. The most unbearable piece of all is uncertainty. Nick is balanced between life and death while doctors fight for him. The family prays and fractures and tries to stay upright. The police chase answers. And Matt remains the largest unanswered question, a shadow that could transform into the next tragedy. At any second. Because if Matt was willing to ambush Nick, willing to knock him unconscious, willing to turn a moving car into a choking chamber, there is no guarantee he will stop just because Nick is lying in a hospital bed. Night falls, the hospital corridors stay bright, and yet darkness lives in every face. Sharon stares at the emergency room doors like she is staring at a future that might shatter without warning. Victor stands motionless, but inside that stillness is a storm gathering. A storm he will aim at whoever dared to harm his son. Victoria holds her composure to keep Sharon from breaking, even while a cold emptiness crawls along her spine. If Nick doesn't make it, the Newman family will never be the same. And just when it seems the worst is already behind them, A new ripple passes through the hospital, an urgent shift in movement. A change in the sound of footsteps. A signal that the story is not finished at the scene. The possibility settles into Sharon's bones with terrifying clarity, even if Nick opens his eyes. This war may only be beginning because Matt has never attacked simply to retreat. Matt attacks to clear the path for the next strike, and the next target he chooses could be the one thing Nick cannot get back up to protect. On our TV Spoilers channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.